So over to you, Ajahn.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks.
Lehar. So let us just get into the meditation straight away. So just sit nice and comfortably, whatever way you like, and we'll just get started. And as always with the meditation, just start off by relaxing properly, by allowing yourself to feel at ease and to feel good. This is such an important part of the practice. It is not usually right to go straight to the meditation object, because if you do, you're often not ready for it. Then you can get tense and all these kind of things. So just learn to relax properly first of all. And even if that is all you do during your meditation, that is already a nice thing and already a positive advantage of the meditation practice. So start off by just feeling your body and making sure that you are nice and relaxed. A lot of the time with the meditation practice, all you have to do is just to be very patient, just sit back and just allow things to calm down. There isn't really much to do, but if you have the right kind of positive attitude and you're patient, you allow things to just disappear into the past. And gradually, it's as if you emerge into the present moment. And the trick is just to make the present moment pleasant. Avoid the tension, avoid the pain, and move towards a sense of contentment and just the enjoyment of being in such a beautiful place as the Dhammaloka Buddhist Center here. And as you learn to allow the world to fade away and to fade into the background, you start to become a passive observer of the present moment. And just notice how delightful it is not to do anything. We always do things, we always use our mind so much, but just sitting back and just observing is so much more peaceful, so much more beautiful and powerful than always doing things. Just allow yourself to rest in the present moment in this way. And as you do that, you start already to see what meditation practice truly is about. And just allow yourself just to observe all the phenomena around you, whatever you hear, whatever you feel, just allow it to flow by. No resistance, nothing that attracts you or you are averse to at all. Just allow the phenomena to flow. And as you learn to do this, you understand how you can flow very evenly and at ease in the world in general. And if there is some sort of attachment, take note of that. Try to understand why that is happening, why it is that you're not able to just allow phenomena to flow on. And as you do so, you're just sitting back and observing. You can feel the energy slowly accumulating in the mind. What a wonderful thing it is to have a place like this, right here in the middle of Perth, a place where people can find some degree of meaning, a degree of profundity, apart from all the trivialities of ordinary life. What a wonderful thing that is. Have a sense of gratitude for that. And if you inspire yourself in this way, it is something beautiful you can take with you in your meditation practice. But now we're coming to the very end, and I would ask you to contemplate just very briefly what has happened over the past half an hour or so. Try to understand this process. If you do feel more peaceful and more at ease, ask yourself why that is the case. Okay, so that's the meditation for tonight, so please sit comfortably and we start to talk in a minute.